the gun he used 10 years ago today to kill his wife Rachel and 9-month-old daughter Lillian Rose in their Hopkinton home.
Neil and Rachel had the life everyone envied: a beautiful family, a quaint home in a peaceful Massachusetts town, and a love that seemed unbreakable. Neil and Rachel Entwistle, along with their baby daughter, Lillian, were the picture of suburban bliss: outwardly perfect, inwardly complex. But on January 22, 2006, that image shattered into a horrifying nightmare. When Neil walked into his home that morning, he found a scene that no one should ever have to witness. He discovered that both his wife and daughter had been shot dead, and he had no clue who could have done such a terrible thing. Neil claimed he was so heartbroken upon seeing the bodies that he considered taking his own life. But when it came to actually ending it all with a knife, he just couldn't go through with it. Instead, he hopped into the family car and drove over to his mother-in-law's house to get a .22 caliber revolver. Unfortunately, the house was locked up tight, so he told the police he decided to fly back home to England to see his parents. So the big question on everyone's mind was, who could have killed them? Friends and family described the Entwistles as a loving and friendly family with no known enemies. Why did Neil leave the grisly scene and board a flight to England, leaving behind the bodies of his wife and daughter? What dark secrets had been hiding behind the perfect facade? In the days that followed, the small town of Hopkinton would be turned upside down, as the truth behind the Entwistles' seemingly perfect life slowly began to unravel. But the biggest question remained: who could have done this and why? But in one terrifying instant, that family bond was broken in ways no one could have imagined. What really happened to the perfect life he seemed to have? This case has captured the attention of true crime documentaries, true murder mysteries, popular YouTube videos, and even a gripping book, with jurors calling it a story of unimaginable and unforgivable family murders. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why. On the morning of January 22, 2006, Neil Entwistle left his home around 9 a.m. He told everyone he was running errands for his wife and their precious 9-month-old daughter, Lillian. But when he returned, he said he encountered a scene that no one should ever have to witness. He found both his beloved wife and daughter dead, each killed by a single gunshot wound. Shocked, horrified, and allegedly overwhelmed by grief, Neil claimed that he considered ending his own life right then and there. But when it came down to actually following through, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he took the family car and drove to his mother-in-law's house, where he tried to obtain a .22 caliber revolver from their locked house. When he couldn't access the gun, Neil's story took a strange turn. Rather than contacting the authorities or seeking immediate help, he decided to catch a flight back to England to visit his own parents. Leaving behind the scene of unimaginable horror, he crossed the Atlantic, leaving everyone to wonder what really happened in that house. When the news finally broke, it sent shockwaves through the community. Friends and family who had adored the Entwistles were in disbelief. Rachel had been so full of life, a new mother with a future filled with joy and love, while Neil seemed to be a dedicated husband and father. How could such a tragedy happen to this seemingly happy family? The question that everyone was left grappling with was who could have committed such a brutal act and why? To find answers, the investigation turned to the story of Neil and Rachel themselves, tracing their lives back to where it all began. Neil Entwistle and Rachel Souza had met as university students in England at the University of York. Neil was pursuing a master's degree in electronic engineering, diligently working toward a promising future. Born and raised in the small English town of Workshop, Neil grew up in a working-class family. His father, Clifford Entwistle, was a coal miner, while his mother, Yvonne, worked in a school canteen. The family lived a modest life, marked by hard work and resilience. Despite having a typical upbringing, Neil often felt embarrassed about his humble roots. He dreamed of a different life, one filled with success, status, and the type of security he believed his parents had never known. However, Neil's reserved personality, coupled with insecurities about his background and his thick workshop accent, often held him back from fully blending in with his university peers. Yet, when he met Rachel Souza, everything changed. Rachel, born on December 14, 1978, in Weymouth, Massachusetts, had her own story. She had lost her father, Paul Souza, at a young age, a loss that deeply shaped her character. Growing up, she had been known for her strength, determination, and the deep bonds she formed with the people around her. It was perhaps this strength and warmth that drew Neil to her, making him feel seen and understood in a way he hadn't before. They quickly grew close, forming a bond that seemed unbreakable, and soon enough, they were inseparable. The couple eventually married on August 10th, 2003, at the Second Parish Church in Plymouth, Massachusetts, marking the beginning of their journey together. Not long after, they settled in Redditch, a town south of Birmingham in England, where Neil secured a job at a computer company and Rachel pursued her passion for teaching English and theater at St. Augustine's Catholic School. To those around them, Neil and Rachel appeared to be living the dream. In April 2005, they welcomed their daughter, Lillian. Their family was complete, and Rachel thrived in her new role as a mother. She continued teaching and balancing her professional life with motherhood, building a network of friends and colleagues who admired her warmth and dedication. For a while, it seemed like the Entwistles had everything anyone could ask for: a beautiful family, fulfilling careers, and a comfortable life. But underneath the surface, there were cracks in the picture-perfect facade. While Rachel was thriving, Neil was struggling. He wrestled with feelings of inadequacy, stemming from his working-class roots and his thick accent, which made him feel out of place in their social circles. He couldn't shake the sense that he was being judged for where he came from and how he spoke. These insecurities weighed on him, holding him back from pursuing better opportunities in England and leaving him feeling trapped in a life that didn't align with his dreams of wealth and prestige. Seeking a change, Neil proposed a fresh start, suggesting that they move to Rachel's home state of Massachusetts. Although Rachel loved her job in Redditch and had built a close-knit community there, the thought of being closer to her mother, Priscilla, and stepfather, Joe, appealed to her. With Lillian now a part of their lives, Rachel looked forward to having her parents nearby to take on the role of loving grandparents. So, they made the move, but Neil didn't tell anyone the whole truth. While he assured Rachel and her family that he would continue working remotely for his company, he had, in reality, quit his job. Neil allowed them to believe that he still had a stable income, maintaining the illusion of financial security. It was a lie, and as they resettled in Massachusetts, Neil's deception began to unravel. Upon arriving, the couple rented a house in Hopkinton, a town famous for being the starting point of the Boston Marathon. Located at 6 Cubs Path, the home was in a peaceful cul-de-sac, boasting 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, and over 2,400 square feet, seemingly perfect for a young family. But with no job, Neil had no steady income, and Rachel soon noticed cracks in their finances. One day, when Rachel attempted to use one of Neil's credit cards, she discovered it had been frozen. Alarmed, she confronted Neil, questioning their financial situation, but he refused to answer her questions. The reality was far worse than Rachel could have imagined. By this time, Neil had accumulated about $40,000 in credit card debt, a consequence of his relentless pursuit of a lifestyle he couldn't afford. Obsessed with shedding his working-class identity and being perceived as part of the elite, Neil had started exploring risky, even illegal, ways to make quick money. One of these ventures included creating scam websites that promised people they could get rich quickly through pyramid schemes. One of his sites, called millionmaker.com, charged a setup fee and monthly subscription for people looking to make money online. Neil also set up a company called Embedded New Technologies Limited, which existed only as a front. He even sold CD-ROMs on eBay, calling them business manuals and promising financial success to those who bought them. But by 2006, Neil's activities grew increasingly suspicious. He began taking customers' money without delivering the promised products, prompting eBay to shut down his account and investigate his fraudulent behavior. In addition to these schemes, Neil spent a significant amount of time on adult websites and reportedly had a gambling problem. Court records would later reveal that in the month leading up to Rachel and Lillian's deaths, Neil had lost hundreds of dollars on an online gambling site. While Neil was sinking deeper into debt and deception, Rachel was focused on settling into their new home and preparing for a visit from her old college friends. She wanted everything to be perfect for her friend's arrival, spending her days unpacking and decorating, making their new house feel like a home. But behind the scenes, Neil's internet search history painted a disturbing picture. During that week, he searched for information on quick suicide methods, the best way to kill someone, and even specific techniques for fatal knife wounds. He found online forums discussing such topics and noted a particularly chilling suggestion that advised stabbing a victim below the ribcage for a lethal result.
He, in fact, was looking up different ways to commit homicides, different ways to commit murders. He was also looking at different sex sites.
Neil's search history also showed he had been looking up escort services, visiting sites like Adult Friend Finder and HalfPriceEscorts.com. Just days later, he was actively searching for escorts in nearby towns, reinforcing a pattern of deceit and secrecy. On January 20th, 2006, Neil left the house in the morning, telling Rachel he was going to the mall to pick up computer supplies. But instead of heading to the mall, Neil went to his in-laws' home, which was empty at the time. Using a spare key, he let himself in and went straight for the lockbox where his father-in-law, Joe, kept his guns. From that lockbox, Neil took the .222 caliber revolver he had once used during a family shooting outing. Neil Entwistle returned to his home, revolver in hand. Rachel Entwistle and baby Lillian were believed to be in the master bedroom, an ordinary family moment interrupted by a calculated, sinister act. What happened next has never been fully confirmed, but what authorities found suggests an unthinkable betrayal. Rachel was cradling her daughter when Neil allegedly entered the room. Reports indicate that Rachel took a bullet to the head, while Lillian was shot in the abdomen. The shot that struck Lillian traveled through her small body and lodged into Rachel, just under her breast. Later that evening, Rachel's college friends, whom she had excitedly prepared to see, arrived at the house. They had no idea of the horror waiting behind those walls. When no one answered the door, worry started to set in. They tried calling Rachel's phone, and alarmingly, they could hear it ringing inside the house. But there was no response. Growing increasingly concerned, they noticed a note from Priscilla Souza, Rachel's mother, which only deepened their sense of dread. Rachel's friends contacted Priscilla and, after a hurried conversation, decided to go to the Hopkinton police station to report her missing. When the police arrived at the Entwistle house, they initially suspected a carbon monoxide leak or some other emergency had struck the family. They saw the windows and doors all tightly locked, with no immediate signs of a struggle. One officer used a card from his wallet to unlock the front door and stepped into an eerie scene. The TV was still on, and the family's basset hound, Sally, was barking from her crate. As the officers made their way upstairs, they heard classical music softly playing from what they assumed to be Lillian's room, adding an odd layer of normalcy to an otherwise disturbing scene. In the master bathroom, they noticed a bathtub filled with cold water, as though someone had prepared for a bath but left it unused. They continued their search, heading into the master bedroom. There, they found the bed in disarray, with sheets and blankets thrown about as if someone had left in a hurry. Curiously, the family car was missing from the garage, suggesting the Entwistles might have gone somewhere in a rush. But as officers left that evening, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Rachel's friends, who had waited in front of the house, felt equally unsettled. Despite the cold, they refused to leave the area without answers. They parked their car in front of the house, keeping a silent vigil through the freezing night, hoping for any sign that Rachel, Neil, and Lillian were safe. They had been advised not to enter the house, to avoid disturbing any potential evidence, but they couldn't bring themselves to leave without knowing what had happened to their friend. The following day, officers returned to the Entwistle home to conduct a more thorough search. As they entered the house once again, they were immediately struck by an overpowering, foul smell. Following the source of the odor, they were led back to the master bedroom, where the stench grew even stronger. An officer, deciding to investigate further, pulled back the covers on the bed, and that's when the horror was fully revealed. Beneath the bedspread lay the bodies of Rachel and Lillian, lifeless and concealed under the sheets. The discovery shocked the officers, who immediately called for backup, turning the Entwistle home into an active crime scene. Investigators were left to piece together a case that would grow more complex with every detail they uncovered. Meanwhile, Neil was nowhere to be found. As detectives worked to understand the events that led to this tragedy, they discovered the family's white BMW parked at Logan International Airport. The keys were still in the ignition, as if Neil had left in a hurry, abandoning everything behind. By this time, Rachel's parents, Priscilla and Joe, had been informed of the situation. They soon received a call from Neil's father, Clifford Entwistle, back in England, delivering yet another layer of confusion to an already convoluted case. According to Clifford, Neil had phoned him from England the previous day, claiming he had returned home to find Rachel and Lillian dead. Distraught, Neil said he had driven over to Priscilla and Joe's house to inform them, but, finding no one home, decided to fly back to England to be with his parents. Clifford tried to convey Neil's distress, explaining that his son was devastated and needed the support of his family during such a traumatic time. But Priscilla and Joe were left with more questions than answers. Shortly after their conversation with Clifford, Priscilla and Joe received a call from Neil himself. Neil's story mirrored what he had told his father, but with a significant omission. He claimed he hadn't called the police after finding Rachel and Lillian, opting instead to drive to Priscilla and Joe's house. He reasoned that he didn't know how to reach the police, and that his first thought was to tell Rachel's family. For Priscilla and Joe, this explanation did little to quell their suspicions. On January 23, 2006, Massachusetts State Police Sergeant Robert Manning reached out to Neil in England, hoping to gain a clearer picture of what had happened. The phone call lasted nearly 2 hours, during which Neil recounted his version of events. Manning was taken aback when Neil calmly acknowledged that he knew his family was dead, showing an unsettling detachment from the devastating situation.
I'm calling you because we have some bad news about your wife and your daughter.
Yeah,
We responded to the house and that deer deceased.
yeah,
Do you know that?
I did.
Manning asked Neil why he hadn't called the police or contacted Priscilla and Joe directly after discovering the bodies. In response, Neil claimed he wanted to be with his wife and daughter, saying he had contemplated suicide himself but had been unable to go through with it. When Manning pressed for details, Neil revealed that he had gone to his in-laws' house, intending to retrieve a gun for the purpose. However, officers suspected that Neil had actually intended to return the revolver he had used, knowing that Priscilla and Joe would likely be away at work. Neil's behavior raised more red flags, especially when he casually mentioned that he'd left his car keys in the ignition at the airport because he didn't think he would need them again. When Manning asked if he planned to return to the United States, Neil replied, "I don't know. Why would I?" The nonchalant attitude he displayed was chilling, especially given the gravity of the situation. Even more disturbing was Neil's decision to reach out to the landlord of the Hopkinton rental home, requesting the return of his security deposit and discussing Rachel and Lillian's belongings as if he were simply concluding a lease. His cold detachment shocked those involved in the investigation, painting a stark picture of a man apparently unaffected by the tragedy. Meanwhile, Rachel's family, who had been desperately awaiting answers, were left to grieve the loss of their loved ones without any real closure. As investigators continued to unravel the case, a tip led them to believe Neil had left his friend's house in Scotland, possibly trying to evade authorities. Acting quickly, officers tracked him down on a train, fearing he might be attempting to go into hiding. They arrested Neil, finding a newspaper clipping about escort services among his belongings, a small but haunting detail that hinted at his activities in the days following Rachel and Lillian's deaths. Back in the United States, a judge issued an arrest warrant for Neil, formally charging him with the murders of his wife and daughter. Once Neil waived his rights to fight extradition, he was brought back to Massachusetts to stand trial. His demeanor remained calm and calculated, but as the evidence against him mounted, Neil's story began to shift. In a new twist, Neil claimed he had initially believed Rachel had taken Lillian's life and then committed suicide. According to his revised account, he had found Joe's .22 caliber revolver near their bodies and returned it to the lockbox out of respect for Rachel's honor. He insisted he hadn't called the police because he didn't want anyone to think Rachel had committed such a horrific act. But to Rachel's family, this claim was more than just a lie. It was a cruel, baseless accusation that painted their loved one in an unthinkable light. However, the evidence told a different story. Forensic investigators found that Rachel had been holding Lillian when they were shot, a fact that made Neil's claim implausible. The positioning of the gun and the trajectory of the bullets suggested that Rachel could not have been the shooter. Furthermore, the gun's length would have made it impossible for her to use it in the manner Neil described. As the trial approached, Neil's defense team submitted two major requests. First, they asked that Neil be released on bail so he could return to England to stay with his parents until the trial began. Second, they requested that all evidence collected from the Entwistle home be dismissed, arguing that the officers had entered the house without a search warrant. Both requests were ultimately denied by the judge, who ruled that the police entry was justified given the circumstances and that all evidence collected was admissible. When the trial finally commenced, Neil's defense team chose not to call any witnesses, and Neil himself did not take the stand. The defense argued that traces of Rachel's DNA had been found on the gun, implying she might have handled it herself. But experts explained that while Rachel's DNA was detected on the inside of the gun's barrel, her DNA was not found on the gun's grip. The only DNA on the grip belonged to Joe, his sons, and Neil himself. This distinction was crucial, reinforcing the prosecution's case and effectively dismantling the defense's implication that Rachel had handled the gun. Despite Neil's claims, the forensic evidence painted a damning picture. Rachel's DNA was only found inside the barrel, likely transferred when she was shot while holding Lillian. Her absence of DNA on the grip further confirmed that she hadn't been the one to fire the weapon. Ultimately, the jury found Neil Entwistle guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Rachel and Lillian. The judge handed down 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring Neil would spend the rest of his life behind bars. When he heard the verdict, he briefly broke down before adopting a cold, expressionless demeanor. It was a chilling end to a case that had devastated 2 families and shattered the image of a once idyllic family. After the trial, Neil's parents, Clifford and Yvonne Entwistle, spoke out, maintaining their son's innocence. They continued to insist that Rachel had been struggling with depression and that she was the one who killed Lillian before taking her own life. "We know that our son Neil is innocent," Clifford told the press, voicing their heartbreak over the evidence presented in court. They were adamant that Neil had only acted to protect Rachel's memory, refusing to accept the verdict. Rachel's family, deeply wounded by the trial's accusations, rejected this narrative entirely. To them, Neil's version of events was a blatant lie meant to preserve his own reputation at the expense of Rachel's. The suggestion that she would harm her own child was an affront to her memory, and the pain of these accusations only deepened their grief. Years passed, but Neil continued to assert his innocence from prison. He began corresponding with pen pals, telling a revised version of the events that occurred on that tragic day. According to Neil's letters, he claimed he had never left the house that morning. Instead, he wrote that he had been in the kitchen when he suddenly heard gunshots coming from upstairs. When he ran up to investigate, he found Rachel had shot Lillian and then taken her own life. But to the authorities, Neil's ever-changing story was nothing more than an attempt to rewrite history. In 2023, Neil attempted yet another legal move, this time claiming a juror had improperly reenacted the murder during deliberations. According to Neil's defense, this alleged reenactment in the jury room was a violation of trial rules and should be grounds for a retrial. He argued that the juror's actions had compromised his right to a fair trial. However, this appeal was quickly denied, with the judge finding no evidence of misconduct that would warrant a new trial. With that, Neil's final appeal was dismissed, leaving him to serve out his sentence. His case remains one of the most disturbing family tragedies in recent memory, a chilling example of how a person's ambition, obsession with status, and deceit can lead to unimaginable consequences. The Entwistle family tragedy stands as a haunting reminder of the darker sides of human nature, hidden behind seemingly perfect facades. While Neil's actions have been widely condemned, his story continues to captivate true crime followers and serve as a sobering example of betrayal within a family. For Rachel's family, the pain endures, but they take some solace in knowing that Neil is now paying for the devastating loss of Rachel and little Lillian.